Hello, Superwomen. We have Christine with us today, and she is going to talk about something we've been talking a lot about: coercive relationships. How to know if you're in one, how to know if one of your friends might be in one, and what can we do to help them get out of it? Welcome, Christine.
Hi, Gillian. Thank you.
So, how did you first discover, all right, Christine, you're in a coercive relationship and you need to do something about this, girl? When did you realize that?
Well, I'd love to say that it was very early in the relationship and I recognized everything that I should have recognized, but I didn't. So it took 17 years of marriage and the relationship. There were signs and things that I knew maybe weren't right. And I had questioned early on, but over time, I started to, for lack of better terms, lie to myself about what I was experiencing. And once you live in that lie for as long as I did, you don't even know the reality of it anymore. So I was probably um, at a year 14 when I finally was like, okay, there's clearly something here, but I wasn't really ready to name it yet. And so I spent 3 years just kind of focused on figuring out my exit plan, making the actual exit. And then once I was out on the other side of it, that's when I really started to dig deep into what I had been living and what I'd been experiencing for that long.
We've been talking a lot about intuition and trusting your intuition, learning how to hear it, and I think so often we just kind of shush it because it
Yes.
doesn't. Often our intuition doesn't align with what our mind is thinking or what our mind is wanting us to do. Our mind, like in yours, your mind's wanting you to stay on this path of marriage, and your intuition is being like, "Girl, get off the train." And so I know it can definitely give kind of some internal conflict. And so it sounds kind of like it took about 14 years of you working with your intuition to finally come to mentally and rationally accept what you knew kind of all along. When you and I were chatting right before we recorded, you were saying kind of when you mentioned exit plan. Talk us through what you did that you liked and maybe things you would do differently if you had to come up with an exit plan again.
There's definitely some things. When I was working through, I'm a very like process driven person. I need a list and I need to check the things off the list. So I started with like making a budget, figuring out like what did I need income wise to keep the life of my children the same, to maintain the house, to take care, to own like the coverage of the healthcare and all the different things. So I started with that, with planning those pieces out, figuring out what that really looked like, so I could start working towards that. And like I said, that was at year 14, so I had about 3 years before I got there. There are things that happen as you mentally start working through that exit. I heard somebody describe it on a different podcast about it, like you turn into like this rebellious teenager when you're working through a divorce at some point. And it was brilliant because I was just like, you do. Like you test boundaries that you maybe know aren't the safest boundaries to test and you wouldn't have tested before, but now that you know that you're heading down this path, you feel a little more empowered, so you start to test some of those things. I maybe wouldn't have tested some of the boundaries because things did escalate over that last 3 years to the point where it actually involved my kids, and, like, that direct thing had nothing to do with, like, me behaving a certain way, but it just there was just opportunity to just not do to not push back in some scenarios. But the biggest thing that I would have changed, there were 2. My therapist and my lawyer both, throughout the process, were very knowledgeable about the situation I was in, even if I wasn't really ready to recognize it for what it was, and I wasn't really ready to call it abuse or even coercive control. They've seen it a million times. The thing I would have done was listen to them. There was one time during that process, and it was when I was giving him the papers that I maybe, trusted him too much or thought I knew him better than I did, trusted him to behave like I expected him to behave, and as we all know, that usually doesn't work out. My lawyer and my therapist both told me that he would act out in that moment, and I just didn't think he would. I didn't think he'd hurt our children, and not physically, but emotionally and just mentally, and he did, and that's something I can't ever take back. And the other big thing that I would not have done, I wouldn't have gotten so hung up on the money. I was so, like, focused on replacing all of his income and making sure that I never had to rely on him ever for any of the financial things, and I wanted to keep the kids in the house. I felt like that was the one thing that maybe I could maintain for them as, like, a source of stability, and I did, but it took me 3 years to get to the point where I could do that, and then on the other side of it, we weren't out maybe 3, 4 months, and both kids were like, why are we still here? Like, can't we get a fresh start? And so I think in that moment, I realized, I delayed for 3 years, and that was 3 more years of impact for all of us, just to keep them in a house, not a home. Like, home would have been wherever mom was at. And I think sometimes we get hung up on some of those things, like the superficial things for me, like that it was the house, right? That I had a purpose for it. It didn't matter in the end. They didn't care.
It's something I hear a lot with women going through a divorce. And the analogy I think of in my mind is like if you have two kids and one of them hits the other one, you don't hear or see that, but you hear the squeal of the one that got hit. And so
Yes.
that's always the one that you're like, why are you being so, and the one that actually hit him is like, doo, 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 nothing to see here. And so that's a very consistent story I hear with women in high conflict and coercive relationships, breakups, divorce, is that they're always seen as the problem because they're the ones squealing when they get hit every time.
Yes.
So I heard a lot with that. And then with your children, it kind of comes back to what brings to my mind is the Maya Angelou quote where it says, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel.
Yes.
And it really that just rang a bell in my mind when I heard you talking about how your kids, they didn't care about the house, the this, the that. They cared about how they felt, and they felt happier, safer, more content with you than they did in a house with their dad. But it's hard for us because I don't think our society really promotes that. It definitely promotes you're a loser, you have failed at motherhood if your kids are not getting 3 brand new pairs of sneakers on the first day of school every year.
Yes.
So I
And you
told
already feel like a failure because your marriage just ended,
Mhm,
right? Like you have all of this failure and pent up shame, I think that, yeah, our society definitely maybe needs a little realignment
mhm, that's a
and
good
expectation setting, because it's not realistic to expect any parents, even especially right now, even dual income households, to be able to afford things like that.
we were just kinda talking about that the other day about just how expensive things are today versus, like, when I was, a teenager in the '90s. We just money seemed it was like the '80s in excess was still kinda continuing over, and we just really had no concept of the cost of things, no concept of, $8 for a movie ticket, and now it's like, $22 for a movie ticket? How and when did this happen in our world? And I just can only imagine the stress that causes for 2, not to say even mention 1 parent trying to get by with that. So, going back to kinda to your relationship, what were some signs looking back or if someone is maybe looking in the mirror this morning, having a heart to heart, kinda what are some signs and examples that they could look for that to reassure that they're not crazy, that this is coercive control, it's abuse, it's not okay? Because I think we don't wanna give ourselves permission.
No, we don't. And it's hard because you don't want to admit that you put yourself in that position and that you chose a partner that would do the things that they did. And back to the shame piece, that's where it kind of stems. I think that's why I delayed it as long as I did. The most eye-opening thing that I did in my like discovery process while still being married was I sat down one day and I just started writing. Like, what were give me the like a it was the last 12 months was my window. And I was telling myself, just write down the times that he made you feel bad, that he made you want to cry, that he insulted you, that you felt overwhelmed. And it was alarming how long and that list got and how fast it got long. And again, I was in a very short window that I was trying to look. I wasn't going back 17 years. I was looking at the most recent 12 to 18 months. And I think what I found in that was it wasn't this big thing where he just, like he hit me one day and then I had a bruise. It wasn't that. It was the repeated kind of backhanded compliments, things that seemed maybe genuine on the surface, but it was things like, I really wish people loved me like they loved you because I'd have more friends. That seems harmless until I have to internalize the guilt of you not having friends that is not on me. And then there were little things like, comments about my weight or comments about how something looked or comments about my hair color. And none of them positive comments. So I continually, like, the pattern I recognized in those comments was that I would change my hair color or I would try to lose weight or I'd wear a different outfit. And so I'm constantly like pivoting throughout every single day and night to try to be the version that he was looking for, just to find out that the target would move tomorrow. And there was name calling. There was a regular angry outburst. Like daily, where he was coming home angry about work or a driver on the road or something, but it always was something that I had to brace for, something that I had to like calm him down from. And again, like these, when I was working through this list, it was all of these little micro behaviors that kind of turn into it, on paper, it then showed me the pattern that was associated with several of them. And that was the most eye opening thing I did throughout the entire process. And it was just feeling based, right? At that point, I wasn't digging into the different forms of abuse or anything like that. It was just like, what made me feel bad? And it was a lot.
You're like, "We're gonna make a list." It kinda just it brings me back to we were talking about, differences between, being a teenager and now. When we were teenagers, we'd make a pros and cons list of which boy
Yes,
we wanted to
yes,
date, who had the cuter face or who had the nicer car or whatever, what was of value at that point in life. And we had no problem making a pros and cons list with our girlfriends and that sort of thing. But as an adult, we really I think if I had been saying what you're saying and I'd called you as a girlfriend and you'd said I'd be like, "Girl, want me to make a list?" Like, "What?"
yeah,
Yeah, but it does help you put words to it because I think,
yeah,
oftentimes we can have feelings that we kinda just ignore or pipe down, so that forces us to put words to it, which forces us to recognize it, to forces us to accept that word, and I like how you mentioned it's small things, but it tells a bigger story, like the road rage. That would always kill me with my ex. He would just go on. Now, granted, he had nowhere to go, nowhere to be at any given time. And so it's not like, we were rushing a pregnant woman to the hospital, but he would be sure to make sure that he honked and leaned and da 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 for anybody to. And my whole thought was, do you think you've taught them a lesson? Do you think they're going to go home tonight and reflect and go, you know what? I was a horrible driver today. And this angry man in an SUV honked at me and wagged his finger, and I'm gonna be reformed tomorrow. So but when you think about the bigger picture, and I didn't even take it a step further at that point, that it's control. It's wanting to have control of every situation and every person in every situation. It wasn't about, oh, he almost killed us, and that was his natural reaction to blow the horn. Oh God, it wasn't that he thought, well, if I do this, maybe he'll be a better human tomorrow, and I'm helping the race and the collective human race by improving this person's driving. No, and so I love how you talk about that and then kind of just looking at each thing because in abuse where there's not that I wish one or the other on anyone, but abuse where there's bruises, abuse where there's blood, ER visits, it's easier for those around us to understand it, accept it, and know how to come to our aid for support. Without those things, it's hard for us to know it, for us to accept it. And it's even stranger for our friends and our family to come to our aid because they're like, I don't see what's wrong with you. He's got road rage. Okay. It's hard until you put all these things together. So what's kind of something that you've noticed in your community or that friends have done for you? We're making a how-to list. So that your friends have done for you through this process that really helped you believe yourself, trust yourself, and to have the strength to get on the other side.
I want to throw just one more because there's a big one that I missed in the last piece. Pay attention to holidays and birthdays, big days that are special to you. 9 times out of 10, if not more, those get ruined. That's a real clear indicator.
Yeah.
And I missed that, and I feel like that's a big one that's real obvious for people to, yeah, that's a thing. So I didn't wanna forget that one. On the thing that I noticed, I guess, with my friend group, and my family too, initially, there was a lot of because I hadn't literally until the day I gave him papers, I didn't tell anybody because I was afraid that if I told somebody treated him different, looked at him wrong, just gave any kind of indication that they were disgusted by his behavior, because I knew they would be. I trusted that they would be, I guess. My fear was that that would create bigger issues at home. So they found out at the same time he found out, and nobody questioned it. Not one person. And that kind of blew me away a little bit because they were trusting. The thing is, they knew me. And I think that's the piece that we maybe as survivors, we lose the ability to trust ourselves and everybody around us. Even though we lean on them, we don't always trust them and we don't trust their judgment. And I think that's the piece that I grew from the most in this process is they all hands down trusted the things that I said. They never questioned anything. The most common question I got was, "Why didn't you say something?" And then as I explained if I had, what would you have done and how would you have reacted? And then they realized, okay, never mind, that probably wouldn't have been helpful. I get it. I wish you would have said something anyway. But the community that is out there has been just, even outside of like my immediate circle, it has been mind blowing. And I felt like the whole 17 years I was alone. And what I recognize now is that there was this whole community I could have been a part of without ever having to like disclose who I was. And I could have still maybe gotten access to resources or information or even just like the ability to talk to somebody else that's experiencing it confidentially and like anonymously. And I wish I would have known that back then. But there's all kinds of Facebook communities out there, and it is a true, like, sisterhood, brotherhood type community. It's just mind-blowing how many people want to help because they've already been through this and are on the other side. It's it's beautiful.
And I love that you bring up that point because going back to when we first started chatting, we were kind of talking about like where you were in your head, kind of what your worries were. You were worried that you were going to a place of alone, not realizing that you'd been in a place of alone and you were going to a place of love and support and friendship. And I think that's probably going to I'm hoping someone hears that and it's like
Yeah.
a big light bulb. And so kind of with this, tell us about your book that you wrote and kind of what you want that how you want the world to receive that.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote The Truth She Showed Me, originally called The Lies She Told Me, and there was
No.
a healing process that happened there, realizing that my body had been telling me from day one that there were some things that I should be paying attention to, and the less I listened, the more or the louder it got through health issues and things. But throughout the book, like, I start the very early chapters in, focusing on like the lived experience. It's a really immersive book. So caution if you buy it and read it, please like take your time working through it and read the parts that are comfortable to read. Skip the ones that aren't. You don't have to read it front to back. But at the end of each movement, there is a series of questions that kind of helps the reader, depending on where they're at, whether they're in it, whether they're leaving, or whether they're on the other side, just kind of work through the recognition and validation of their experiences. I've heard from a lot of people that it's been very, very helpful as a non-victim survivor, somebody who's supporting them to read it because it sh there are just there are moments that you think are so normal and maybe odd in the moment, but then you're like, "Eh, whatever, it's fine." So, like, for example, you're out to dinner with another couple and you get the look, you know the look, and all of a sudden you guys are leaving. And you blame it on the kids, you blame it on, "Oh, we gotta get home. Oh, we're done, we're tired." Other people, I mean, they might recognize that you left abruptly, but there's cues in there, like when you can see the body language and people shift, you can see them get tense. And so those are the things that I tried to articulate through the immersion in the book to help people see what they can't see, kind of. But the book also then works through my exit strategy and the things that I did to leave. And it's not really a checklist per se, but it gives insight into the planning that I did. I maybe went overboard. W In hindsight, I wish I maybe would have left sooner, but everybody's leaving is their own journey and it's on a different timeline. It might be 10 years, it might be 1 year, it might be 1 day. It just depends on where you're at. And then the last movement really wraps up with the healing process, the things that I've done on the other side. It starts to talk about challenges in future relationships and just the things that I've had to work through in that process too, because it doesn't end just because you're gone.
So glad you bring that up because as we've been talking so much with guests who are like you, very brave and very vulnerable, we realize a lot of the things, no matter your situation, a lot of the situations started years before the situation started. It started with generational trauma. It started with childhood trauma. It started with insecurities we had in high school about ourselves. A lot of these kind of set us up. I don't want to say for failure, but they set us up to be susceptible to. We had a lady who was scammed on the internet. And same thing. I mean, her life experiences prior to that set her up to be the perfect victim for an online scamming. And so I like that you talk about not just going, okay, well, the work is done. Let's move on. The root is still there, and doing the work to fix that so that you don't carry it into your other relationships. How would you kind of emotionally prepare someone for that part?
Ooh, it'll be the hardest part. I think we think that the hardest part's done, and you spend a lot of time looking yourself in the mirror and just recognizing the things that you may be attributed to the situation. Like, it's not your fault that they behave the way that they do, but I definitely enabled the weaponized incompetence. I absolutely enabled that because it was easier, and that's not an excuse, but it's what I had to do to survive. And so there's the recognition, and then there's the working through the grief and the forgiveness of ourselves. I can take or leave the forgiveness of the other person. That's up to every person on their own, but forgiving myself and starting to trust myself again. The trust piece is probably the hands down hardest. I think the piece of advice I'd provide there is have a support system, whether it is that confidential anonymous support system or it is a therapist. I mean, as I was working through mine, I saw a traditional therapist and then ended up having to go to a trauma therapist too. So I was alternating week after week. I was working through Reiki energy healing. It wasn't like a one stop shop. Everything was like, here's my one person who's gonna heal all the things. I learned about the emotion code today, and I'm totally interested in, like, digging into that further because I do think this goes back before my marriage. There are some things that I probably need to deal with yet. So it's it's an ongoing journey, and you won't wake up one day and it's just over, unfortunately, but I do feel like you learn a lot more about yourself, and so it gets easier to trust, and it gets easier to set boundaries, and that was hard. I don't know if you went through that, but that was next to trust, setting a boundary, that first one was terrifying. But you learn that, you know what, people will accept them or they won't. And they get to choose that. And then you get to choose what to do with it. But it's freeing to be able to start to recognize and have that self-awareness because once you can identify what triggered you, you can then start to address it. And that's a really empowering thing.
What is your dream vision for your future with your kids, and where do you want their takeaway from this to be?
So they have not read the book, and I honestly have maybe preferred that they never do. I just think there's maybe things in there they don't have to know. But if someday that they want to, it's there. So I hope that they will trust themselves. I hope they'll see the changes that I made and the things that I've done to take care of myself and them. And I hope that they'll apply that to their relationships and themselves. I think this generation's a little different than the one I grew up in. They tend to be a little more like I aspire to be the person that my daughter is. Her cutoff game and her boundary setting is exceptional. But, I'm hoping that like I played a part in her being able to learn those behaviors. And, I watch my son with his girlfriend and it is night and day. Like he's the guy that walks her to the car. He never lets her go out in the dark. And, they're teenagers. And so, when you see those behaviors, you're like, okay, there's hope. Like we didn't wreck all the things, So I want them happy and I want them peaceful. And hopefully those two things go hand in hand always.
Can't think of a better wish for anyone. I love that. And now if someone's listening and they hear themselves in your story, where can they find you online? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, great question. So I'm on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at The Truth She Showed Me. So just the book title. The book's available on Amazon, but you don't have to have the book. I just started a series of prompts that you can use to start as your exit strategy. So it's bite-sized prompts to help you get to where you want to go.
I love that. And I love that you provide actionable things. That is so much kind of in line with what a Superwoman Handbook is trying to be, a true actionable source, versus someone just being like, oh, yeah, girl, that sucks. Sorry. Here's some actual questions you can ask yourself. Here's some, like at the end of each of your chapters, going to have that workbook. I love that because it's not just I don't want to say in one ear out the other, but it forces you to really process what you've read and how it applies to your life. So we will drop all that in the show notes for y'all in case you're driving so you can find Christine online and download the book from Amazon and for yourself or for a friend. I think so often we forget the value of books as gifts. because
Yes.
knowledge is power and it's one of the best gifts we can give each other. So I love that you wrote this, and I'll kind of leave you with the last word to send our audience out with today.
Couple words would be, if you're asking yourself, is this abuse? Is what they're doing bad enough? Your body already knows. Your mind is already catching up. So just know that it is, and know that people believe you. I believe you. You will be believed. Hopefully, you walk away with some validation from this podcast and some of the other ones you've heard.
Well, thank you, Christine. And as always, y'all be safe. We'll
Yep.
listen on our next show.